we will be in conversation to talk together about one of the collections on Black women suffragists. And so following our conversation together about historical paths to discover. To unearth means to discover something new, hidden, or lost, something that has been kept secret, intentionally or unintentionally. We must unearth our truths, the truths of our paths, our knowledge, our stories, our understandings, and uniquely for Black and African people, because the world has been diligent in keeping our stories hidden. And so, as my mother has always taught me, what has been hidden and buried beneath the earth's soil will always spring up toward the sun. And so we must unearth, excavate, and reveal the unspoken, uncovered, hidden, and deeply seated histories of our past, of people of color across the world, because our children deeply need and deserve a curriculum that is intended to capture their brilliance, their genius, their beauty, offering more complex and more complete views of themselves, and aren't just steeped in narratives and stories of pain, but also of joy. So I want to say again, welcome. We have always started with genius and joy. From the days of our sister Harriet Tubman, from using songs and spirituals and hymns, like the song Go Down Moses. And when you heard that song, it was an indication that if you desired freedom for yourself, you could have it. That was genius. From hair braiding into our Black girls and women's hair, sometimes hair braiding maps, and sometimes just hair braiding for joy and beauty. That is genius and joy. See, our stories always started with genius and joy, and they continue with genius and joy throughout the decades. From the brilliant rhetoric of my favorite essayist, Maria Stewart, to the unique ways that our sister Zora Neale Hurston used language, our language, so we can see ourselves in literary works, to her contemporary, Dr. Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, who wrote a book about love and told us to be brave enough to love ourselves and to love others. Happy birthday, Yolanda. Today is her birthday. To the genius and joyful stylings of jazz, of hip hop, genius, joy, of bounce music, genius, joy. And even in the most harshest of conditions, Black folks always strive to have joy. And that's something very beautiful. And as a historical researcher and scholar, I would find the language of genius and joy throughout the historical archives. And that was just so fascinating. You could say I can't hardly keep myself, because I was so fascinated by the history of it all. Like the Schomburg archive of a book published in 1863 entitled The Black Man and His Genius. See, we've always knew our genius. We've always written and documented our genius. Now, unearthing is important in education because there is an erasure of Black genius and joy, not only in K-12 schools, but in teacher education as well. See, we learn about the educational theorists of Vygotsky, John Dewey, Maslow, Piaget, but we teach less about those who actually have experience and a historical record of successfully teaching Black and brown children. People like Mary McLeod Bethune, who opened a school for Black girls in Florida. Anna Julia Cooper, who taught us intersectionality and who was a school principal and a teacher. Sister Clara Muhammad, who taught us one of the first models for homeschooling and educating our own. Others like Carter G. Woodson and W.B. Du Bois, Elizabeth Thorne Scott Flood, who opened up her home in 1854 to Indigenous and Asian American students, in addition to Black children. Frankie Harris Wassam, who was a school principal in Tennessee, and she taught for 54 years, both in K-12 education and historically Black colleges. See, these are the people we need to be learning from in our teacher education program. And so I invite you, if you are a professor, a teacher, educator, to go to the Schomburg and look at the digital archives and look at your syllabus and ask yourself, do I have this sister or brother on my course syllabus? Am I unearthing, right, Black genius to engage?
Okay. So basically, what she's saying is, while we're talking about, traditionally, when we talk about Black history, we only talk about the achievements of what they contribute to society, but we have yet to talk about the genius that existed in the education of African Americans early on. How are we a country that we created all of these wonderful, we have all of these ancestors and all of the wonderful contributions that they taught themselves with less than what we have, but we're unable to match any of their achievements. If we are, it's few and far between. It's not to the extent that it should be. So one of the things that she's speaking about is just recognizing the importance of it and seeing the value in it. And it's not for her to convince anybody that African American history matters, but it's how can you not address the needs of all of the children that you are teaching? And you're only looking at it from one point of view. So I had the next clip I wanted to have, it was speaking about just basically where education began. Because anything that's started if the foundation is wrong, then everything that comes from it is going to be wrong. And this is the piece that myself, I didn't even realize how skewed the view is on how to teach. But it's only been from, as she said, Piaget and all these other people. That's all we were taught in classes, and this is how you're supposed to teach them. But this is how that was from a Caucasian male's perspective. It was not at all from the perspective of an African American. And so some of the issues that she was mentioning is like the first primer. Did you all want to speak on the measuring rod? Is the measuring rod, which was a text that was put out by, supported by the Daughters of Confederate. And this particular textbook is designed for educators to know this is what you should teach and this is what you shouldn't teach. Make sure you don't say this, but make sure you do say that. And I don't know if either one of you I want to speak on the measuring rod or just the primer before I get into what she has.
So what she's referring to are these books that they created as a guide for educators on what they should include and then how they should approach education. And so, of course, that was all a whitewash version of what it is that they expect them to know. But there was nothing in there. The only reference to African Americans in the book was just in terms of slaves, right? Not of accomplishments or things that were done or the potential of what could be accomplished. So everything was from their viewpoint of this is how the history that you want them to know is what was displayed back then. It was interesting. What I'm thinking about right now is that we still see this today. You know, it was interesting. We were reading the book talking about the Daughters of the Confederacy. I don't think they're called that anymore, but I know I hear terms like Moms of Liberty and other kinds of things. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to push through this initiative to change the narrative of what history was. You know, they don't want their children to feel bad about their, what their ancestors did. But okay, so then allow them not to feel bad by not repeating. And you can't repeat if you don't know. So, it's definitely cyclical, something that if we aren't aware of it, if we don't take an intentional approach to address it and adjust it, then it'll just continue.
I concur. It definitely is still seen in classrooms today. It is, the verbiage has changed constantly, but the sentiment is still the same. Let's not talk about that. Oh, let's go. Let's change it and just change the words and and put more positive spin on the word. Oh, they were doing things to better the economy, and I've heard that as a reference to slavery. That's what we're calling it now, just the way to boost the economy. And that's the narrative we're gonna give African American children. And we constantly, you hear a society where you're complaining about how our children do not have the knowledge to continue our society, and we're worried, but we are the keepers of that process, so we have to be about the mission of making that change. And sometimes they have to hear the harsh truth. They have to know so that they can appreciate and want to continue to push forward so that we don't continue to cycle. Because it almost does look as if they're trying to make it go back in the same direction.
Yeah. Well, I know, Dr. Lionel mentioned that when we had the whole conversation about, just how they're basically trying to erase our history. And if we continue on, they will pretty much minimize us down to a page. One of the things that they were saying in the book was reject the books that speak to slaveholders of the South as cruel and unjust to his slaves, because they did not wish for their children to think negatively of their fathers, grandfathers, and their great grandfathers. Didn't want the children to feel white guilt. So we are so concerned about one race of people that in order to preserve their self-esteem, we're just going to erase the existence of another. One other point I wanted to make was they were talking about like the percent of books depicting characters from diverse backgrounds. Because like Ms. Ballard mentioned, it's still very much continuing going on. We have, it was University of Wisconsin, Madison gave a breakdown of the books, and they said 1% of the books had American Indian. 7% had Asian Pacific Islanders. 10%, just 10% had African Americans depicted. 27% were animals and others. So they would rather include animals in stories and others rather than include African Americans. And then the 50% of the books were, of course, had Caucasian or only white characters. So this is very much still going on. This was in 2019, and it's not changing. So that if nothing is done, then it'll continue on to the point where African American children will continue to not value themselves. If you don't see yourself in the stories or in the storylines or being successful or even mattering, how can you turn around and expect them to value what you're telling them? If you don't see me, how do you expect me to see you, so to speak? So this is what I need to do.
Share the screen.
How do I share the screen?
Yeah, I take it off. A second.
Will we have time for those questions?
Inshallah. I'm sorry, we're doing the share screen thing.
Yeah. There we go.
And so she's going to speak about some of the
Now,
problems that she.
Because our education system is still following anything but Blackness as the model. This is the problem. This is one of the first textbooks for teaching children how to read in the 1600s. This was published in Boston in the United States. This was called the New England Primer. And when I study this book closely, I find so many problems, but here are 5 problems. The primer centered whiteness, white culture, white representation, white ideologies. It neglected to offer diversity of humanity, diversity of thought. The primer was apolitical. It did not have any opportunities to learn in a socially just way. The primer did not allow one to see wide identities, and manifestations of themselves. And even though the primer was taught to Indigenous people, it only featured the English language, and it only taught skills. Now, if you're teaching just skills, I have to tell you, that is not genius, and it's certainly not joy. When we compare this to today, 1600s to 2020, when we compare this history to where we are today, and we look at the Common Core state standards and other state curriculum standards, when we look at state assessments, when we look at adopted curriculums for school districts and schools, and we look at teacher evaluation, we are still only testing and evaluating and teaching skills. So in that way, not much has changed from the 1600s. These parts of our educational system today are still noticeably absent from the histories, identities, liberation of Black people. And so I'm arguing that it is time for a new way forward, because Blackness always gave us the model. Why should we study Blackness? Because very plainly put, the learning standards or learning goals historically for Black people were more advanced than we have in schools today. Why not learn from a group of people who simultaneously found genius and joy in everything that they did amongst the nation's harshest realities? See, that's the group of people that we need to learn from. And in my own research, I study Black literary societies. I've been studying these archives and Black literary societies from the last 10 years, which started with young Black males in 1828. They read, they learned, they debated, they wrote. And they did so in ways where they were cultivating their mathematics, their science, their social studies. This image is also from the Schomburg Center. And they did so as they were cultivating their genius and joy. They did it in a way of what Bettina calls these abolitionist pursuits towards justice and humanity and a better way forward. See, they weren't just cultivating their minds, they were doing so to put it into action, to make the world a better place. And so in one literary society member, James Fortin, who was a leading thinker of the time, we can learn everything we need to learn about education just from this one artifact that he wrote. He gave this speech in 1837 to the American Moral Reform Society. He says that I conceive that our literary institutions should have the power of doing. He says that our main objective is to accomplish two things, an intellectual reformation and a moral one. He says, I don't know of but better ways to do this than by reading, by close comparisons, by thorough investigations. Because if you can become into a thinking space, you would soon discover that your highest enjoyment consists of improving your mind. He says this will give him rich ideas and teach him that your limbs were never made to wear chains of servitude. You would see that equal rights were intended to all. And then he says, now the way I'm describing education, who would not want to be inspired with the taste of reading? Now let's break this down. What do we learn from him? We learn a few things. We learned that by education is linked to skill development, but not just skill development. We have to do something with those skills. Education is linked to action. Historically, for Black people, this has always been the case. We learned from Blackness that education was about cultivating our minds and our hearts. We learned that you did not have education without teaching about anti-racism and justice. We learned that we wanted to cultivate our knowledge in a way to be able to debate and stand in the same room with anyone. Intellectualism. And finally, just from his very few words, we learned that education is linked to joy. Do you know that there are some kids in our K-12 classrooms who leave our high schools who have never experienced joy? Now, I don't know about you, but I want to be on one side and not the other. Because when you break this down, we were more advanced historically among Black folks than we are in the United States in education today. And so I studied this model. I came to these 5 different learning goals that we had historically. See, today we only have one, which is skills. But historically, we cultivated our identity. It was important for us to know who we were, to celebrate, to validate our identities, our multiple identities. But we also spent time learning about the cultural lives of people who are different than us. We learned skills and proficiencies across the different content areas. We learned new knowledge, intellectualism. Our 4th goal was criticality. See, we were focused on understanding equity, power, and anti-oppression. That's criticality. And finally, we had the pursuit of joy. Now, joy is so important and so beautiful because, you know, we didn't neglect it, even in the time of pain and harshest realities. And to exemplify this point, I want to show you this 1837 archive, this artifact. It says, by reading, you can visit countries that you have never been to. You can converse with the wise. You can view elegance when you read and when you learn. You can ascend. See, literacy and education was linked to ascension. That's a beautiful thing. And by reading, you can enkindle the most sublime emotions that can animate your human soul. And every time I read that, I get goosebumps because I'm like, that's what I want. That's the kind of curriculum I want to write. And they did not call their learning standards. See, let me just be clear. Learning standard is a word that did not come from Black people. Standard is a word that is seeped in smallness. Standard indicates a ceiling, a stopping point. I am learning the standard to pass a test. What Black people called our learning goals in schools and education and communities were pursuits. See, pursuits indicate that I am learning this toward the goals of self-determination, self-reliance, self-empowerment. I'm not learning this to just pass. Now, because...
Okay, so basically, our education system has been about just the test. We're no longer concerned. We have trimmed down so much of the curriculum to where it's solely centered on, well, is this going to be on the assessment? And we've tied all of our, so to say, all of our eggs are in that one basket of skills. But I know myself, I'm seeing the students are actually, because they don't see themselves in this education, they don't see the value of how it matters to them and what is this going to do for me further down the line. They're not interested. They're figuring out ways of avoiding it. And the art of reading has become so lost. And I know my 2 guests can definitely speak on that, as they teach primary.
As a currently 3rd grade teacher, and this is my students, this will be their first year taking the state assessment. They're embarking on something that they're gonna have to continue throughout up until 12th grade. However, they're so left behind in the thought process. And also, I was tired of hearing, but teaching 3rd grade, they said these children are truly the product of COVID, where they really were not from those foundations. They were in kindergarten when COVID hit, and they were not getting that real reading. They were just clicking on a screen, and if you paid attention, you did, but nobody was really doing anything. And so now they're so far behind where we would traditionally have 3rd graders. And now we're saying, okay, now you're gonna take this test. This test, you know, clearly is not about them. It is just more so about a state mandate tied to a political game and funding. And now you're pushing us to now, okay, we're gonna skip those chapters, skip that. Okay, let's go here because the test will start on here, so we're gonna start from here. It's like, okay, we need this part. Well, we can come back to that. This is the point of coming back to it if we're, and so now you're teaching children backwards because now the focus is the test. And we're testing in other areas throughout the year as well. And now, because there's such a technological generation of children, everything is about clicking. There's no meaning to it. It's the same process as when they're sitting at home on YouTube or on whatever, they just clicking, clicking, clicking. And so, oh, they're not doing well. No, they're not doing well. They have no, what their response, the administration, our state mandates are, the response is now they want us to become the circus wrangler to now, okay, we'll promise them a pizza party if they do this. And then you want them to do this, then tell the parents that we'll give them this. And it's like, but when are they gonna really learn and how are they absorbing anything? They're not absorbing the material. The goal is that they carry material that they can build upon. If they're only just take this in just to deposit it when they click, it's gone once they do it. And now they're wondering why the next year, they seem like they don't know any, they don't. They just did it for that moment. And it's just, we've gotten so far away from, like I said, it's just teaching to skill, not for them to learn and take it in and appreciate. So, and then that also has lent itself to the teaching shortage that we all are hearing about, that now they're pulling the bus drivers in and they're pulling whoever will just stay in the building all day because teachers are walking away. So they're getting discouraged because you went into it with an ideal of wanting to educate children, and now they're forcing you to do this other stuff. But as Dr. Muhammad is saying, we have to get back to the joy and helping the children see that there is joy in learning. And but we have to be about the business of helping them do that.
Yeah, as I was reading the book, especially when she got to the part where she listed out the components of her HEAL model, which is what the tree represented. And I thought through the curriculum that we teach, right? I was like, well, do I see these components in the curriculums? And we have in CPS, different schools have different things, but in my particular school, we teach from a canned curriculum in math, and then we teach a curriculum that CPS created for our literacy. And in the canned curriculum, there is one component, there's definitely the skills, right? The skills are there. They've always been there. We're going to teach them skills. They do have the identity component embedded in the curriculum, but it's optional. It's a tie to culture, a tie to different things, a way for kids to be able to resonate with the skills and see how they can apply it in something that's familiar to them, but it's optional. So if the teacher gets to it, or if they want to do it, then they can, but if they choose not to, then you just move right on and continue teaching the skills. And then the curriculum that CPS created for literacy, they have attempted to try to incorporate a lot of these different things. But even there, I didn't see like the components of criticality or joy, in there. It really resonated. What she said is that, knowing that a 12th grader could graduate high school and have never experienced joy, on their educational journey, that's, as an educator, that saddens me. That makes me, like, how did they get that far and feel as if they've never experienced joy? And I think it has to be an intentionality from the teacher to ensure that we're giving them those opportunities so that they can experience that.
I agree with both of you all's statements. One of the things that I took away from her speaking on the curriculum and instruction is that it really has to become something that matters to the administrators, and it really has to be something that matters to all those who are in charge of curriculum, because my husband can attest that him being a former CPS teacher, the bureaucracy that they put upon teachers makes, I don't know too many teachers that are experiencing joy. You know, I've been teaching for 25 years. It's few, I mean, I see the joy in bits and pieces, but it's not an overall sense of joy because it's the absence of my voice. It's the absence of, and I know my husband spoke many times about how he wanted to be able to teach a certain way and he wanted to cover material a certain way that brought him joy. And that was like, would you take that up out of here? We don't, nobody asking about all that joy. We need you to, try to experience, you enjoy what you teach, and nobody asked you all of that. Are you adhering to this script? That's all we need you to do is adhere to this script and make sure that you're, you have this posted on the wall and you said this particular word. Like, it's so formulaic that they've convinced themselves that this is how you're going to get the best out of the student. But at the end of the day, it's not working. It's not working. And it's like the more it's not working, the more pressure they put on the teachers. And it's kind of like you just keep kicking the dog when you get home, and it's like a domino effect. Like, I'm gonna get yelled at, my husband will get yelled at by administrators. Then he come in his classroom and then someone will come in and tell him what he's doing is wrong. And then the kids would reject everything that he's teaching because, again, it's not connecting with them. So it's like a constant cycle of no one recognizing the contributions and the brilliance and the genius in each factor. Yes.
I have a question. Thank you all, for your perspective. Thank you for sharing. Some bit of a layered question. Sister Rashida, you mentioned that, they institute particular policies, give you curriculum to work with the intention that that we know best and this is what will work. I'm a bit more cynical, and I believe that, it is not designed to work. It is working in exactly the manner in which it is intended to. My sister's a longtime educator as well. But being in a field which is very much unlike any other, where you don't just get to come in and work, but you also have an advocacy aspect of it as well, right? Because you can have a great curriculum, but you don't have the resources or the textbooks to go along with that, right? So I get to the point where I would like your perspective. So I know that two of the major textbook producers are out of Texas, and they've got a disproportionate impact on our exclusion, right? And the way information, is presented, right? So being on the ground, how much effort is put into it? Maybe that's through unions or, I don't know what mechanism will be, is put into pushing back against the textbook industry, as well as the school boards that govern, educational policies on the ground in the schools. So how much pushback and how organized are teachers with regard to that, in addition to having to manage a classroom and teach folks?
I'm gonna let Andrea.
So I've been on both sides in that aspect. I've been I'm sorry. I've been on both sides of that as a union rep, as well as being on the curriculum committee for our elementary and middle school. And I've been on the pilot of it to go out to another school to see it being implemented and things of that nature. And I too am quite cynical in certain aspects. I think that comes with the years. And I say that my mindset is always, this is just a check off. Well, we included the teachers, but at the end of the day, they chose what they wanted to choose because they would hear the teacher real-time feedback. Like, this doesn't necessarily work for our children. Yes, it might work here, but not so much for us. But this is what you know, the up and coming thing is. Also, I am a school board member for a high school district, and in that capacity, I see that money plays a big factor in that usually wins out. That's what it usually comes down to. And they'll say, okay, well, this one has this, yeah, but this is save us some bottom line here. And ultimately, you end up buying into something, and now you're committed to 5 to 7 years. So that's a complete cycle of at least a freshman, a senior, twice to see this not be working. And then it's like, well, we gotta wait till we end this. Like, how many times are we gonna keep doing that? I've even seen where teachers are refusing. Now, even taking on the potential of being written up because they don't like the fact that this is what we're using. I have to impart this, and I'm knowing that this doesn't work. So I think it comes down to really, because even in the high school, we're supposed to in the spring have a sit down with a group of teachers who are part of this, you know, revolt, as they keep calling it, but that to say, because I'm on the curriculum committee, so I said, I think we need to hear them out. It's not that they're just coming to aggravate you. They obviously care and they want to pick something that is enjoyable, but yet it is resonating and it's showing growth. So I'm hoping that this will be an opportunity for their voices to be heard and hopefully leading to more teachers, you know, not so much feeling they're not listening to us, so it don't even matter. I'll just keep pushing this along. Because that's what you also end up happening with a lot of teachers. Now they just, whatever, what day does my check clear?
Yeah.
So, and that, the kids moves out in that.
We have another question. Go ahead.
You want to go first? I know you.
No, go ahead.
Well, thank you all very much for that presentation. It was very thought-provoking. I'm not in the education field, but I am interested in education. And I agree with Imam Tariq, and I agree with you that the system is working the way it's designed to work. And I'm out of the labor movement as well, and I learned in the labor movement that many people think that the school system is an educational institution that's involved in politics, but it's actually a political institution involved in education. And so I think that paradigm shift help us to see exactly what's going on in the system.
Yes.
And if we don't understand that, then we're lost in the system. The second thing that I want to mention is that as part of my cynicism, our own, as African-American people, our historians and others, we give permission to the Caucasian male to do what he's doing as it relates to education for us. Because we have a tendency to cut our own people out of our history. There are certain people that we mention in our history that's more comfortable for the Caucasian mind to accept. So our history is more the civil rights history as opposed to the all-inclusive history of the Nat Turners and the Denmark Visas and the Elijah Muhammad's and the others. So we have a role to play in that.
Yeah.
Lastly, I mentioned, you can't look to the unions, they're political institutions as well.
Yeah, but you have to follow, I'm sorry, you have to, in order to be heard, and a lot of times you have to follow that protocol to even get on the docket, as you would say. You know, it's not the mode that you want to take, but you know, everybody wants to continue to go home and continue to feed their families, and that plays a part as well. So sometimes you have to kind of follow the system.
Yeah, I know one of your point about education being politicized, if we had more time, I actually had a clip of what she was speaking exactly about that, when she was saying that when has education not been politicized? Because when we talk about the measuring rod, we talk about the primer, all of that was intentional. And for you to go through all of the trouble to make sure, all the way back in the beginning, that we don't talk about slaveholders, that's intentionally, like, will not address a group of people and how we harm them. And when you don't address what you have done, then how could you expect what you are basing everything on to be a strong foundation? If it starts off on the wrong, we'll say agenda, with the wrong agenda, how can we expect good to come from it? Yes, I'm sorry, Sis Gloria had other thing. Yes, go ahead. Sis, go ahead.
Yes, so I did thank you all for your comments. You know, schools need teachers who are willing to push the boundaries, right? But my concerns are that that deviating from or not encouraging the joy of learning really goes back far more years. First of all, we've been robotizing our students by teaching only standards.
Yes,
Dumbing down,
yes,
right?
that's exactly what she was saying.
Dumbing down. Secondly, failure to teach real literature, including the classics. Who even talks about the classics anymore? Okay, and how that robs you of imagination. And I'm not saying that the classics are, you know, you know, what we all are living and holding our breath on, you know, learning. But we know that the classics have a place, right? The classics do have a place in terms of, because some of the classics are rooted in history, you know, and they really do have a place in terms of developing that love of reading,
Yes.
right? The classics have allowed some children to be able to immerse themselves into that literature and expand their imagination so that they then decide that then want to read more, and they're able to push the boundaries in their own lives. The fact that paper books have been taken out of the classroom, okay? And there are no libraries and cursive writing.
Yeah.
And I think there's a movement to restart that. But there's actually been some research that have tied cursive writing to imagination, right? You know, the fact that when you're writing, you're using curlies and, you know, that increases your imagination. And this is a sensitive one, but going back to how students have been dumbed down and the part that parents have played, okay? The fact that parents began using their cell phones and tablets as babysitters so long ago, and now the children crave stimulation at all times. They want to be entertained all the time, and that actually rewires the brain. Okay, and we're using these same tablets in the classroom and rewarding them with playtime on the tablet if they rush through their work.
Yes.
Because the standards have been set so low that, you know, there's no push to really learn anything. It's just finish this task and we'll reward you with,
Exactly.
you know, this. Finish that task, we'll reward you with that.
Yes.
And so it's become a bartering system that is extremely unhealthy for.
It's a dysfunctional relationship, for sure. It's very dysfunctional. I'm sorry, he had his head up. Yes, sir.
I'm a cynic also. What I've been hearing is, we in the problem, we ain't in the solution. And what is the solution?
She had,
You
oh,
have
she had a
people that are homeschooling their children. And so, realistically, can you expect the enemy to give you what you need to excel. That's unrealistic. But, what's the solution? We need Saturday school.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
We need
Need
to
to
take it
mentor.
upon, we need to take it upon ourselves.
Yes.
To give our children what they need. And you can't force everybody to go, but if you present it well, some of our children will go.
Yeah.
You know, if we make it where they can understand that they stand on the shoulders of others, you know, but trying to go against what your principal say will get you fired.
Yeah.
You know, so, do what they do through the week, but create a curriculum that is for us. They fighting CRT left and right.
Yes.
We need to create something else for them to fight. You know, we've been doing it for 500 years. We can't just, you know, a job is a job. You there to do their bidding. You can't expect them to want your children to be at a place where their children got to compete against your children.
Yeah.
Because they know and we know,
Yeah.
given the same playing ground, we'll succeed.
Just one other thing I wanted to add, and that is with regard to robotizing our children. What they're doing is putting in place the next phase, which is gonna be the robots doing all of our jobs. Okay, so they're already in some fast food restaurants. They're already in the Ford plant and other automotive plants, okay? And these were historically the good paying jobs, right? For, you know, exactly, you know, and so now they're being taken away. And so what then is gonna happen with these young people who won't be able to provide for themselves or their family? So it just opens the door for the criminal gateway, right? It just opens the door. And I agree with you, brother. You know, the solution, I mean, I think listening to Dr. Muhammad's book, I think that provides some real serious solutions. It needs to be built upon.
Yes.
Okay, and that means going to the Department of Education, because that really is the head of this nation's educational system. What CPS or any other district does, that's an iteration. You know, they're taking whatever the standard is established by the Department of Education, and then they are left to their own devices to interpret it the way they want, which is why states like Texas and Florida are rewriting history and writing out history. And so I think that our African-American educators need to establish their own consortium where, and a lobby, so that we go to the Department of Education and we have a hand in what the standards are and what is expected from to be in our textbooks for our children.
Now, one of the things I could say about it. Oh, I'm sorry, Brother Omar, well, you have to say something.
I'm a product of homeschooling. Okay, so so y'all mentioned Sister Claire Muhammad in the open, and Sister mentioned Sister Claire Muhammad. So I'm a product of University of Islam system. So from kindergarten all the way up until high school, I attended the University of Islam system. So I didn't have the privilege of the public school system until my last 2 years, right, in high school. So when I did transfer to a public school system, I had a rude awakening how far advanced we were in our education. We was having algebra in grammar school, and I'm in high school, and they teaching algebra and whatnot. So the whole school system was behind. When I was coming up, our parents, we had to read. It was 9 of us. I have 9 siblings, and we will read. And in the morning, we would read our holy book, the Quran. And back in the day, our parents would have us reading the Bible in the morning, or during the day, so we learned how to read, and it started from home. And we have, with this integration and segregation, I agree with both systems and whatnot, integration messed us up, you know what I'm saying? But segregation allows you to have your own culture, you know what I'm saying, to bring to integration. Not that you lose all of that, lose your educational upbringing. You use your cultural background and all of that, and you see it. Say it like this, but you see how we lose it just in some of our appearance. Just recently, you see sisters coming back with their natural hair now. You know what I'm saying? But integration forced us to get higher, to straighten our hair and look like them and stuff like that. So subconsciously, we see black. I mean, consciously, we see black, but subconsciously, it's white, still glorification and whatnot. So what I'm saying is that, like you said, the solution is that we as a community, with our churches, with our mosques, with whatever institutions that we have in our community, we need to go back. It's not up to you to teach my children, for me to prepare my children to give to you so that your job would be easier and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? But integration has tricked us. You know what I'm saying? And making us feel that we made it, and we're individualized, and we don't, work as a group. You know what I'm saying? Because I got my car, I got my house, I got my home. On block, we don't even know our neighbors. So that keeps us individualized. Well, we used to be collective as a group, and we wanted to know each other.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Black folks, we got a history of hanging out. You know what I'm saying? When you see black folks hanging out, that's not him. We are a social people. So, that's what I see it.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Had my hand up. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Good. I very much appreciate our presentation today. And I'd like to make an observation. And we're talking about, the miseducation of the Negro that's prevalent in this month's African American History Month. And we're also in this community of African American Muslims. We're celebrating at this period of time what we call our Savior's Day. And what was mentioned, the love of education in the theology that was given to us in the Nation of Islam, that was one of the main factors in that particular theology, was to learning yourself and others. And our school was called the University of Islam. And Imam Wardi Muhammad explained to us that concept was universal knowledge. So I think this is something we're addressing too, and it's in the history of African American people. As we were developing, we can see those minds, like we just seen Sister Muhammad and her thinking, this independent thinking in the human being, to look at our problems, look at our situations, and come up with solutions. So I think that's what we're addressing now in our educational system, and this dilemma that we're seeing, that we need to grasp and control and develop what we need as African American people. We look at our problems. Our problems are different. It's not the same as every other ethnic group in this society. We were brought over here as slaves and have been worked against ever since we've been here. So this process of independent thinking, and we can see that in Malcolm. We can see this in W.E. Du Bois, in many of our great leaders. And, even today, as I mentioned, Sister Gloria mentioned, they're trying to erase in some libraries the autobiography of Malcolm X. So this is a great issue. I mean, a very important issue that we have to grasp and take a hold of, because we see it as a problem. It will remain a problem until we come up with the solutions and implement them. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time and their day. And I thank you all, and I definitely want to thank my guest speakers, Andrew McDowell and Paula Janet, for coming out. We barely touched on scratched the surface of this. And so inshallah, this will not be our only conversation about this, because she does have some solutions, and she does have approach that is something that's manageable, and it can be manageable. And we should start thinking about it, particularly if we want to see a change. Yes, brother.
I just want to leave an overall view, and that the David Muhammad told us that there's 4 sectors in society: religion, government, education, and business. And I saw that word joy. There should be joy in education, learning something. So we're trying to get us to see that the first sector, religion, should be influencing the other 3.
Yes.
So if you leave that out, just stand in one sector, education, you know lose your joy.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it will leave that perspective.
Yes, sir. Well, I want to thank you all, and inshallah, I'm grateful that this presentation went as well as it did. All praise to Allah. Of course, I overdid it, and I like 3/4 more to go. But you all have other things to do with your day. So